What's really interesting about this big heavyweight fight is, I'm going to say it first and foremost, as much as I've been dick riding Chris Daukaus for all this time since we've seen him, this is the real fight. This is the fight where we're going to really see just how good Chris Daukaus is. And so why I'm saying that, Shamil Abdurakhimov, I mean, we haven't seen him since 2019, since the Curtis Blades fight. And funny enough, the reason why I was about to say Derek Lewis is, even in that fight, Curtis Blades goes in pretty hard for a takedown and gets uppercut and almost gets knocked out in that fight too. So clearly Derek Lewis was doing some studying of some kind, because he picked that shot perfectly. But what I like about this fight is you got two guys. You know, Daukaus was pretty much talked down as not being a true heavyweight and all that kind of stuff. And to be honest, his speed is just out of this world for the weight class. And I think that's going to be what really stands out here, because the one thing about Abdurakhimov is he's only lost to some of the best fighters the UFC's seen, right? Timothy Johnson in his debut, who's now, you know, and has been in that title picture for Bellator for quite some time. And then Derek Lewis, who is once again cream of the crop when it comes to, you know, being a heavyweight that can finish late and really push a guy to his absolute max when it comes to those rounds 3, 4, and 5. And then obviously, we just talked about the Curtis Blades loss. So of those 5, 3 of them in the UFC and against pretty solid fighters. Now, for Chris Daukaus to win this fight, that would put a huge feather in his cap, because he's taking on now, in my opinion, the first real striker at the UFC level. You know, we can give him some kudos for the Parker Porter fight, but I just think that was Parker Porter being, you know, extremely out of shape. Chris Daukaus' UFC debut, very much looking like a guy that wants to, you know, absolutely go crazy, and that's exactly what he did. Then you have the Nascimento and Alexei Oleinik fight. So I don't think that's a coincidence that Rodrigo Nascimento also taking on brand new Chris Daukaus, if you will, probably not respecting him as much on the feet like he did Alan Bodo last night. But then you got the Alexei Oleinik fight. Once again, older guy, very much a grappler who, unless he gets you down on the ground very early, he tends to fade anyway. Both of those fights ended in the first round. Nascimento ended in less than a minute. And so it just tells you where the UFC has been kind of taking Chris Daukaus in terms of development. And now he's just going to get that very real big Russian bear style, who, if the striking isn't even going well, can probably try to take it to the ground. So this is going to be the one fight where we're really going to see how well Chris Daukaus can do, not only against a true heavyweight striker, but also a guy that might be able to change up the game if he's able to not only eat the strikes from Chris Daukaus, but find new ways to kind of change the momentum. That's the big thing with Daukaus that we've just not seen, is that he's taken on guys who tend to want to stand, at least in the beginning, or, I mean, in most of these cases, every fight starts standing, and that's pretty much what Nascimento and Oleinik felt. But that's going to be the biggest test. I think that Abdurakhimov proved himself in that Marcin Tybura fight, and Tybura is an improving striker as well. And that's another fight where you kind of think to yourself, should he have maybe worked out a bit more towards the ground, because it's just taking on a guy who has that kind of power. And, you know, his wins in the UFC are just no joke. And that's why it's such a tough fight, because when you look at the veteran caliber that Shamil Abdurakhimov brings to the octagon, he's just taken on some of the bigger names we've seen in division. And now Chris Daukaus is just getting his feet wet. And so, you know, from a path to victory perspective, it's obviously boxing, range, use the hand spin. I think a lot of 1-2s from Chris Daukaus, the power that we've seen behind those types of combos. You know, he's the kind of guy that can just throw straight punches like that and very much do damage. And I think that's going to be what makes the difference here. If he can avoid getting knocked by some of these looping hooks that some of these bigger fighters throw, I think that's the real key for him, especially if the fight stays standing. I think that he has the speed advantage, the athleticism advantage, and even if you give the slight power and wrestling pedigree to Abdurakhimov, I think that Chris Daukaus just has multiple ways on the feet, especially with the concept of every fight starts standing, to be able to get some of his damage off early. I don't think he's going to be scared by any means, and his ability to time shots, be patient, all that fun stuff for a boxer is what makes him really good in this fight, even with it being such a tough test from a stand-up perspective. That's why I didn't want to sell Shamil Abdurakhimov so short, because I really believe that this is a fight that he can win. You know, this isn't me coming to you with Chris Daukaus against Rodrigo Nascimento, or Chris Daukaus against, you know, the Parker Porters or the Alexei Oleinik's of the world. This is me saying, like, hey, this is going to be the toughest UFC fight of his career, because he's finally taken on a guy that can throw a punch for real. So I think that this still deserves a Chris Daukaus favorite line, but as much as you thought that Chris Daukaus might get a minus 250 or a minus 300 line in his next fight, I don't think this one's it. Despite the layoff for Shamil Abdurakhimov in 2019, I think he's going to come in big, and you have to assume that the skill is still there, and putting in the work to be, that next level UFC fighter has to be part of the game. And I'm a little taken aback by just how even these guys are from a size perspective and all that. And honestly, if Abdurakhimov can't get this fight to the ground, if the striking game's not going well, I think Chris Daukaus is in for a huge UFC win and probably looking at a top 5, top 10 fighter in the next fight, man. Like, this is a primo opponent, and I think they're just bringing along a guy at the right pace. Tom Aspinall is going to be in the same boat, and I think this is anybody's fight in the grand scheme of things. So let's take a look at the lines. I still think he's going to get that minus 150, minus 180 range. I just don't see him being in that minus 200, minus 300 range right now, because not only early with the line, but Abdurakhimov is no joke. And so let's take a look at this one. All right, so it looks like Daukaus is still going to get that minus 200 bump. Shamil is pretty much coming in at plus 165 range. I think it's a good line, and we can even see some of the movement. And not too much line movement. It was an opening line of minus 185, and now it's sitting at about a minus 200. And I guess it's going to get worse. That's the big thing with this one. It's just how good is the striking game of Shamil Abdurakhimov against a guy who's going to be very speedy like Daukaus. But again, he's got the tape to show that he can stand with the best in the UFC, and so that's what makes this a very interesting fight, and why you might not see Chris Daukaus hit a minus 300 line going into his next fight.